Alright guys, time to highlight Synodic Scribe here, and they're going to be doing a lore dungeon deep dive into Sastasha. I've been getting more into the lore of 14, I've been trying to avoid heavy spoilers as I progress through the gap from ARR to Shadowbringers, where my lore understanding begins. This is one of the channels that I've really enjoyed. I feel like I can click on very few of their links. I already watched this one, and at the end it went over Sastasha hard, which I hadn't done yet, so like, I'm getting there. But I thought this would be a fun one to kind of watch and explain kind of where I'm coming from and what I've received, having relatively recently cleared it for like the first time as a long-time player.
The Sastasha Seagrot. An old yet disappointing chapter in Leviathan history. These caves have been raided and fought through more than once. But why? What made this place such a magnet for pirates, monsters, and adventurers? Today, let's delve into the aquatic dungeons of Sastasha and find out.
I think understanding the lore of the early dungeons has helped me care for them more deeply when they pop up in the story. That doesn't mean like them more fondly. I've found that the early dungeons are some of the most tragic stories compared to the other ones that I've done so far. They can just be devastating, and I feel like our hero is so busy cutting their teeth becoming defined as an adventurer that we have like very little agency, and so it feels like we're serving people who don't necessarily align with our moral and ethical compass. We're serving them because that's what the Adventurers Guild is telling us to do, as opposed to later into the story when I get into Shadowbringers and Endwalker, where it feels like I'm aligned with people who at least intend to do something that they think is right, and now it's just a question of do I agree with that. A lot of these early dungeons, it doesn't even feel like they're trying to pretend that this is for the betterment of humanity.
The Sastasha Seagrot is a naturally formed series of caves created by an almost constant battering of the tides. It likely took hundreds of years of natural wear and tear from the ocean, as well as excavation from various digging monsters, to fully realize the vast caverns we recognize them as today. The fact that almost everything inside Sastasha is either eroded down or covered in aquatic plant life lends to the area's strong connection to etheric water. To walk these caves during high tide must have been a death sentence once upon a time. But the cave network has become so large that it became rather cozy to the plants and animals that chose to live here. But that's not all Sastasha was to be. History suggests that the first person to find and fully realize these networks of tunnels was the legendary pirate Mistbeard. At the time, Sastasha was undiscovered, and not on any modern map, making it a perfect spot for one famous pirate such as Mistbeard. He likely would have done everything in his power to keep Sastasha hidden from the world, and in doing so, turn it into a veritable paradise for his crew. But that would have all changed when the Sahagin became desperate enough to summon Leviathan, the Lord of the Whirl. Once Leviathan used his powers...
I don't think that the story does a good job explaining why who we refer to as beast tribes get desperate. Effectively, what we have done as city-states is we have policed people that we deem less than, people that we deem are not worthy of having a seat at the table, back in what effectively is their native lands so that we can have them. And we don't tend to leave them with the most luscious part of those lands. We tend to push, like the Amalja have been pushed just, like they're in the Sigali Desert, they're in Pagalthan, they're not in these big lush parts of Thanalan. And so when they ask for resources and we just kind of push our boot down on their face a little bit harder, like I tend to feel bad for like the Sahagin, that they're worshiping this god that they believe can deliver them to a brighter tomorrow. And like, yes, it ends in destruction, but I don't necessarily question their motives on how they got there. So when the people of Limsa came in, when the Lenosians came in, as their modern day is called, and they said, like, we're going to take the sea, you people that we refer to as fishbacks, which like sounds derogatory and is derogatory, can have the land. Like, that already doesn't make sense. And then now you have these pirates, which like the Nelosians have a weird history with pirates, are effectively then saying, oh yeah, we want the land too. And so we've kind of pushed them all the way to the western edge of Lenosha, and we really haven't given them anywhere else to go. And so the fact that we would have like an underwater cave type thing feels like, yeah, they're gonna want that. They're gonna want that back. Now, as for Mistbeard, that's already a name that, while I have story skipped my way through the rest of the story, sounds familiar. It sounds like it's I believe it's the pirate that is associated with Hullbreaker Isle. Hullbreaker Isle being down in the Chiadales, which is something that I've gotten to know when I've been making a map of Eorzea that helps solve some of the inaccuracies with their maps. So Western Lenosha is here. So we're in Sastasha. So if you go down to Aleport and you just head basically due south, this is going to be the Isle of Umbra. So let's see if I can zoom that out a little. So this is my map, which actually has a coastline that aligns with all the zones. Because if you go look at this coastline, and then you look at your current world map, the current world map not only has an inaccurate coastline, but also does not have the Isle of Umbra, God's Grip, the Mist. It doesn't really do a good job of documenting a lot of this. It doesn't help you understand the scale of Limsa Lominsa and why they are where they are, and why the Lomensans manage the Bretano Sea. They actually manage all the way up from here bordering Charlan, all the way out to basically Thavnair. So it's a huge distance that these seafaring people kind of dominate. And so right here is where we're talking about. So the Sahuagin have been pushed all the way out to this edge, and they can't go north because this is Ogamoro. This is the volcano. So this is basically going to be uninhabitable. Now, we don't really know what's going on up here, but you're in Kobold territory when you get to outer Lenosha up above. So, like, they have been sectioned all the way off. So, like, I think sometimes we tend to present them as something, the Primals, as being the bad guys in this situation, instead of it being the pirates who are disrespecting the Lenoshan agreement with the Sahuagin so that they can pillage their own people while punishing these others.
To turn a piece of Western Lenosha into the Sapsa spawning grounds, the Sastasha Sea Grot would no longer have been safe, forcing Mistbeard and his crew to abandon the caves if they haven't already. Though there's evidence pointing towards the latter, since the dread pirate Mistbeard suddenly disappeared without a trace along with his crew and wealth. But even after...
So that's what clued me in that it might be Hullbreaker Isle, because I believe that was the pirate of Hullbreaker Isle, and if we jump over, where we are here is the Chiadales, this little archipelago down below Lenosha. So this here, if we pan over, is Turtleback Island. I was messing around with using the Eorzean font. So this is Turtleback Island, and so this is somewhere that they like threaten to send people off to. This kind of like picture the TV show Lost is how it's described, and it happens a couple times throughout like the early quests in like Middle and Ocean stuff that they reference Turtleback Island, and so this is where that is. It's only ever referenced in lore. We never go there. Lox Alai is known for being like a flat island that the Grand Company, the Maelstrom, would have done practice exercises on. These two are never confirmed in location. I believe Lox Lai is over here because it is used as a training exercise place for Limsa. And then as we get up into here, this is going to be Garland area, because this is Cape Westwind, this is Cape Osidens, and so this whole area is going to be Garlean up here in the Strait of Merylthor, up in the northern area. And so as you get down here, I don't really know that it makes... that actually may be Cape Westwind. That may be Cape Westwind right there. So, like, I think that's right. I think that's Cape Westwind. It's one of those. Cape Westwind, Cape Ocident. This isn't one of my better labeled maps. So, you end up with the Strait of Merylthor basically being Garlean controlled. So, like, early on, if you start in Gridania or something, they talk about in your early airship travels, before this dungeon, going to the other city-states, and they talk about how dangerous and how rare airship travel is. But that honestly feels like that's their fault, because there is a castrum here, here and here, and so when they talk about flying over, it doesn't make any sense that the airships would fly over to Limsa Lominsa from Gridania. It should always be fly to Ul'dah, and if you fly to Limsa, there should be a cutscene in the middle of that cutscene that says load screen through Ul'dah, second load screen, kind of like a WoW flight path. It doesn't make any sense that they would be flying over here. It explains why they're losing all these airships. Like, obviously you're losing airships. You're flying directly over active castrums for the Garlean Empire. And so when they say that he evacuates, that means he evacuates all the way down past the, like, where all these pirate ships are crashed right here on the southern end of Isle of Umbra, and would have had to go down around the Maelstrom. So likely would have gone around out in the Bretano Sea. And Hullbreaker Isle is known for being surrounded in mist. So when you're running from the Maelstrom, you cannot run into Garlean territory. You cannot run down to the docks that are managed likely by Lomensan ships, but to service Thanalan and everything that's with Ul'dah there. When we come across the twins at the beginning of all three starts to the game, if you start in Limsa Lominsa, in Gridania or Ul'dah, you always see the twins. The twins, logically, I would have to assume pre-MSQ have left Sharlayan. So if we play through the events, if the adventurer chooses to begin their adventure in Limsa, they likely are on a ship that has come from Sharlayan, and we've likely come to Sharlayan from, let's assume, the New World. We never find out where our character's from. Let's assume the New World, because it's the only thing that would cover regardless of our race and class choice, and that we never, ever, ever, regardless of what we start as, come across in story somebody who recognizes us from before MSQ, obviously with like massive spoilers pending. So we land in Limsa. If, however, your character chooses to start in Ul'dah or Gridania, you actually start basically in a carriage with the twins, which means we likely are meeting up either from Thavnair with the twins, who may have been sailing abroad from Sharlayan, and then landed in one of those, and we're taking carriages into the city, in which case we could come from Thavnair, and Thavnair being a big meeting area between Othard, Ilsabard, and Aldenard, which is this section here, and Vilebrand, but also likely to the southern sea where Arcanists come from, down in Mercidia. So, like, our character is likely either from the New World or from Mercidia if we have to give them a physical place on Aetheris, on the planet that Eorzea calls home. So, for him to escape with all of his treasure, he would need somewhere to hide that is not controlled by the Maelstrom or by the Immortal Flames, or by the Garleans. So I think a mist-covered island right here would logically be placed on this right side, and we have no reason to be... This is a bad shipping lane for everybody involved, so this being mist-based is likely right here. You probably can't see it from Cape Westwind, A, because the game devs didn't put it in, but B, because it would be blocked by mist anyway. And so this is what I believe to be Hullbreaker Isle. These are likely just unlabeled. There's also a couple up here I haven't put in, and then a couple up here as you get to the southern end of Bloodshore, and then actually some down here that help justify why from the housing district we can't see God's Grip. The fact that this is not on your world map and is somewhere that can be documented in game from going to the Mist, from physically visiting there, tells me that our world map was likely drawn either right after the Cataclysm, because it's probably drawn right after the Cataclysm, because in Middle Lenosha we don't have the River Nim, which was destroyed kind of with our Calamity, but we do have the Rogue River and the Ageless River. The Ageless River going to the Ageless Wise and to Middle Lenosha, likely coming up from Bronze Lake and sourcing through Brayflock's Longstop. So with the rivers being in that were Calamity drawn, Rogue and Ageless, it is likely drawn immediately post-Cataclysm, when they were taking a census of the world to determine what the Calamity did to the world. And that is why it doesn't document God's Grip, it doesn't document Isle of Umbra, it doesn't document the Mist. Now, the Calamity causing all that fallout, they documented what they could. They likely used existing maps as a baseline and then documented what they could. It's missing some things. Makes sense. But the Mist was likely built to draw in adventurers as adventurer housing. So when you walk by like random NPCs throughout Gridania and stuff, and they say, another outsider, NPCs likely do resent us, because things like the Mist, the limited labor recovering from the Calamity, was drawn to draw adventurers. So as we talk about Sastasha, which we aim to do adventurers, there starts to be an ethical debate with who the Maelstrom is and who adventurers are.
After the creation of the spawning grounds, these caves wouldn't stay empty. Not for long. Eventually, Merlwyb Lohiswin would win the Trident and become the Admiral of Limsa Lominsa. With her newfound power, she outlawed piracy, and this created an uproar. After a lot of deal-making and treaty signing, her new policy on piracy was all but secure. But there were pirate crews that refused to fall in line with her new way of thinking. One such pirate crew were the Serpent Reavers. They refused to give up their pirate ways and were branded as traitors to Limsa Lominsa. What happened to them after the fact is still speculated to this day. It's rumored that they struck a deal with the Sahagin in order to survive on their own. Others say that they were cornered by the Beast Tribe and tempered immediately. But regardless of the order in which it happened, the Serpent Reavers did start working with the Sahagin. And what better place to make their base of operations than Sastasha? Mistbeard had kept Sastasha off of most maps, so hardly anyone knew that this cave network was nearly as large as it truly was. The Serpent Reavers even spread rumors that these caves were swarming with rabid Corel to keep people away. These rumors did in fact work for a while, and the common folk kept their distance. With a new hideout to work out of, and the added protection of the Sahagin, the Serpent Reavers were free to continue their pirating life without interference. And continue they did, as they resumed ravaging the hamlets of Vilbrand. They killed many innocent people for what little belongings they had, Men were left to rot in ditches, whilst the women and children were kidnapped. They'd try to sell whomever would buy their victims, but if there was a particularly interesting captive, the Reavers would keep them. They'd keep these individuals to serve them and work as slaves, but they would even perform despicable acts of cruelty on them if they fancied.
Yeah, so he only touches on this lightly. There's actually a section to the left where you can optionally go down and kind of explore that actually addresses much more tragically what happens to the particularly women that they decide they would rather not sell or kill, that they would rather use for every dirty and gross sense of that word in that context.
These raids across Lenosha continued for a painful amount of time. With the Sahagins' help, the Reavers were able to outnumber and outpace other ships on the open ocean. But not only that, thanks to their numbers and likely their tempering, they fought with an aggressive barbarism that made facing them in combat extremely dangerous on land. Many people lived in fear of being raided by the Serpent Reavers, but this didn't last forever. The Reavers became arrogant with their pillaging, and that arrogance made them clumsy. One day, a shepherd of western Lenosha noticed a group of pirates walking into the Sastasha sea grot. These people weren't attempting to be subtle or hide, they simply walked proudly into the caves. The shepherd assumed they'd die to the corral inside, but these brigands didn't look worried in the slightest. Finding this behavior suspicious, they reported what they saw to the Yellow Jackets. After this information reached the high command of Limsa, it all but confirmed that the Serpent Reavers were likely using Sastasha as their hideout, and that this was the city's chance to purge this disgusting group from the island for good. But since Limsa was still recovering from the Seventh Umbral Calamity and preparing for a potential Garlean invasion, they didn't have enough soldiers to spare for a thorough raid of the caves.
So I have trouble, and maybe this will be more clear to me. I haven't finished even my 2.x storyline. I've only done 2.0. But I have trouble telling who the Yellow Jackets and the Maelstrom are, respectively. It feels like to me that the Yellow Jackets are somewhere between a local police force or militia and a city-state sanctioned military, because they do defend other parts of Lenosha. They are present outside of Limsa. So they seem to extend well beyond a standard like police force and have a might well beyond a standard police force, but they seem to still kind of operate separately than the Maelstrom, who tend to act more like what feels like something more like a mercenary group. And the fact that the Maelstrom and the Yellow Jackets have really kind of any effect on the policy here, the fact that they're the ones reporting back, it feels like they're the ones deciding whether or not to make these decisions, feels very, very similar to as if these city-states were more military run or military backed, that when we talk about our leaders and the voices that are common to the leaders being these people of military prowess and not being a single faction of government, but being a large driving force of government, more from necessity against Garleans and recovering from, everything that happened with the Calamity, it does feel odd as we look to this to determine what to do not only against pirates, but against the Sahagin, because when you think about a military action and a group that is likely funded based on how dangerous their portion of the realm is, it's in their best interest to, whether intentionally or not, be biased towards more military would be better. There is very much this, if you are a hammer, everything looks like a nail type mentality that feels like we have this immediate aggression towards things. So as we have job placement programs for pirates, putting them on farms, and some slip back in, but then we offer forgiveness through our storyline to those people and try to help them adjust to this lifestyle, it seems like we haven't done a great job of offering other forms of things that might cater to people that are pirates. Not everybody wants to go work on a farm all day. Some people do want to be part of the high seas and so on. So we haven't done a great job of offering that. So maybe if something like fishing raids had been more available to NPCs earlier on, if we had done a better job of making like bicolor gemstones a resource that, like, if you think of these things as canonical, if bicolor gemstones existed, maybe there would have been more need for adventurers to kind of quell the threats within the realm and generate these resources. So, even just to the fact that you look at the idea that in Limsa, the predominant drink appears to be documented in base story so far, everything I can gather and everything that I asked Eorzean archives and so on, is that it tends to be rum. But when you look at rum, the only form of glucose, just sugar of any form that I can find is available on Lenosha, is honey. and it's only from wild bees as opposed to the hives in the shroud. There is no sugarcane, there are no beets, there are none of these sources that, not even the tree sap that could be done that way, the maple sap, that's all. So everything is imported. So they're not doing a great job of being anything more than traders. And if they've traditionally traded from having the upper hand, we've left them in a position where they can't succeed. So not to excuse their behavior by any stretch, but the action to come in and militarily strike these people down and strike down the Sahagin feels like a battle that you cannot win, because there is an appeal to being a tempered pirate if you are somebody who lives on the outskirts of Limsa and you are recovering from the calamity, you've lost your homes, they're spending city-state resources to build this housing for these outsider adventurers because they're the only savior, even though you had military skill, and you're supposed to respect this agreement with these foreign aliens that live on the land, these fish people that don't even really like speak your language or share your culture. It feels like you are setting yourself up for an amount of friction that combat's going to be the only choice, and the Yellow Jackets and the Maelstrom being the ones trusted with decisions when it comes to the reasons our adventurer ends up in dungeons feels like, well, obviously the answer is always going to be, if there is a problem in somewhere that resembles a dungeon, it's going to be a dungeon. And if it's a dungeon, we're going to go in there and we're going to kill them.
What they did have was a surprising increase in adventurers after the calamity. Commodore Rayner knew how dangerous attacking the Reavers' home base would be, but members of the Adventurers Guild was the perfect group to commission for help given how prepared they were for life and death scenarios. With that,
keeping in mind that the group that went in before us, I believe, died. So the other advantage of adventurers, these newfound adventurers from abroad, is they don't have friends and family that are expecting them to come home that night. They don't have any local ties to the community, so there is very little outcry if a set of adventurers is lost. If anything, it's they had it coming. So I think using adventurers instead of Yellow Jackets and Maelstrom is even one step further towards mercenaries, and stands in line with the fact that in a lot of the early dungeons, I feel like a mercenary. And considering there is so much in Final Fantasy about forgiveness and about this kind of like, we're on the side of right, it doesn't feel good that our first dungeons are effectively that we are doing this for profit because we're the only people that they believe are worth risking us dying.
The deal was struck, and adventurers were sent into the caves to investigate for pirate activity, and bury them if necessary. At first, there was only aquatic creatures and monsters in the sea grot. There were even sightings of an aggressive corral, so the rumors of those feral felines weren't entirely false. But the further you go into the caves, the more evidence you find of the pirates' activity. Eventually, the adventurers stumbled upon the leader of the Serpent Reavers, Captain Madison. After brief skirmishes, the adventurers pushed Captain Madison and his crew deeper into the caves. The pirates clearly weren't expecting anyone to attack them in their home, so many of the Reavers weren't prepared for a fight, giving the adventurers the element of surprise. The adventurers cut down any pirate that stood in their way, freeing more than a few kidnapped women that had been kept as servants by the Reavers. This bloody retribution continued all the way to their docks, where the adventurers discovered where the pirates hid the bulk of their loot, as well as cornering Captain Madison. The man had realized he was no match for this surprise attack, as the coward kept retreating, hoping that his crew would finish the adventurers off. But when he was the only one left standing in their way, his Sahagin allies made their presence known.
So this section right here is really confusing on the map, because what this implies is that if we jump back up to Western, if you look at Sastasha, we have gone in Sastasha and we have explored this to the point that we are seeing out the other side. Now this whole section over here, these are all sorts of different like formations where you can pass underneath them. There can be ships underneath them, docks, all sorts of things here. So that implies that Sastasha, which is like right here-ish, I wish I'd pulled one of my more zoomed in sections of this with everything labeled. So I assume that's dumping out here. So before in this video, when I watched this through the first time, I thought maybe that the captain had escaped out here, but he is likely coming out here. So no wonder he had absolute free reign to come in and pirate. And then as far as the Maelstrom, they could have patrolled this whole route and never found them. They could have said, well, nobody makes it past here. Up here is really the Sharlayan's problem. So it makes sense that the pirates have been able to operate out of here for so long.
But they weren't there to help Madison, as they finally saw the Serpent Reavers as a tool that had outlived its usefulness. The Sahagin known as Den the Orca-Toothed cut Captain Madison down as punishment for his failure, and did battle with the adventurers instead. Yet this didn't work out as planned, since the adventurers were already warmed up from having fought the Serpent Reavers, making short work of Den and his brothers. Limsa Lominsa praised the adventurers and the guild for a job well done. The people of Lenosha could finally sleep more soundly, knowing that the nightmare the Serpent Reavers had created was finally over. I wish I could say that's the end of the story, but
That's
unfortunately the
Sastasha
Sahagin weren't done with Captain Madison or
Okay, so here's where I should have paused the first time to not get spoiled on anything, because that's Sastasha normal.
his crew. Enraged at his failure, the Sahagin summoned Leviathan, who was not content to let those shorewalkers keep what little humanity they had left. Basic tempering wasn't good enough, so Leviathan released a powerful wave of water-aspected ether over Captain Madison and his crew. This drastic tilt towards etheric water caused Madison and his crew to mutate into water.
Mutate, and they were dead, right? So this is them bringing back the dead. So this is much later into kind of our understanding of tempering and all that, and becomes really alarming. It also explains the giant manifestations physically, because when you're tempered, your ether skews towards whichever god you've tempered's kind of etheric, whatever that is, their natural tendency. And so when you slide your ethereal density that way, that can cause physical manifestations, physical forms. And if there were to be a way to reverse tempering, or kind of undo it at all, it's believed that these physical manifestations would be permanent, that these have altered you on a physical, like atomical level. This is no longer a belief system or a kind of question of free will or any of that. This is a question of your ether, your actual physical makeup, the thing that kind of gives your soul a home. When your soul from the ethereal sea, like it comes here and it lives within this ethereal body, that's a manifestation of that. And the fact that it came back and took him, like, there is a very real question of how much of him would even be left.
Water-aspected monsters. Monsters that lived only to serve Lord Leviathan.
Right.
To the Sahagin, Sastasha was too valuable a location to lose, so they sent the newly transformed Reavers back to the caves to reclaim them. This worked, and any adventurers sent by Limsa to retake the caves came out and admitted it was too much for them to handle. It was at this point that Lominsa's high command decided only seasoned and proven members of the Adventurers Guild could handle this task. And after securing said fighters, they were
I think that's the pirate's pet, so that does imply that he's still, at least enough of his soul is present that his pet recognizes him.
dispatched to fight this new threat in Sastasha. It was at this point that the adventurers realized the fate of Captain Madison and his crew, seeing how they'd been turned into mindless aquatic monsters that needed to be put down if the Sea Grot was truly to be freed. Although Captain Madison proved to be just as cowardly in this form as his previous one, since he kept retreating at the slightest sign of losing. Eventually, he made it back to the docks of Sastasha again, using his new connections to aquatic monsters to summon a powerful kraken. But like the Sahagin, this beast was not on Madison's side, as it would attack him and his pet bird. But the adventurers wouldn't be dissuaded, and fought the kraken head-on. Eventually, they won, and the kraken perished, never to terrorize the seas again. The adventurers were hailed as heroes all over again. Not only was Sastasha freed from the transformed Reavers, but that kraken would never harm anyone else on Vilbrand. And that is the complete history of the Sastasha Sea Grot. As far as I know, the caves are now completely under Lominsan control, and the Sahagin have not even attempted to try and seize the caves a third time. But this is all well and good. No longer is there a group of pillagers and murderers festering in western Lenosha. And
I don't know that we shouldn't give them Sastasha. I don't know that there's any advantage to humans being there for any reason other than illicit activity.
there are fewer aquatic monsters to threaten the island. The life of an adventurer isn't safe, that's for sure. You're likely to walk out of events such as this with a scar or two, whether they be on your body or your mind. But there's something to be said for the thrill of adventuring for adventuring's sake, isn't there? So the next time you find yourself walking the Sastasha caves, remember this story, and be ready for anything.
Well, I appreciate that. That was nice to kind of reflect back on that. It does tell me that I probably still can't watch his videos. I thought maybe I was ready, but I look forward to getting into more of those as I get caught up on lore, and my playthrough is posted over on Gaming Lore Kinda. So thank you so much. Somebody that I've been subscribed to for a while and just actively holding off on. And I want to watch your stuff. I do. I really do. But I just don't want them to spoil me. Kinda.